Stop! I'll buy the fat one! The mountain man's shout cuts through the jeers of a drunken crowd. They laugh at the trembling woman on the auction block, mocking her size, spitting on her dignity. But he isn't laughing. His eyes lock on a strange tattoo burned into her skin. He's seen it before. Years ago, when a dying man in the wilderness was saved by a woman with the same mark. Now, he realizes she carries more than shame. She carries deeds that could bring down the richest cattle baron in the valley. Gunsmoke hangs in the air, whispers spread like wildfire, and every step they take could mean life or death. Is this just a rescue, or the beginning of a war for justice, land, and a love no one expected? When greed and prejudice clash with faith and honor, will one mountain man's choice save her life, or destroy them both? Your comments remind me that we're not alone in feeling deeply. If loyalty, second chances, and human dignity mean something to you, then you're right where you belong. Through the jeering crowd, Jonas led Maria away from the auction platform, his weathered hand gentle but firm on her arm. The morning sun cast long shadows across the muddy street as whispers and cruel laughter followed in their wake. Maria's breaths came quick and shallow, her eyes fixed on the ground before her feet. "Easy now," Jonas murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you." When they reached his horse, a sturdy bay gelding tied to the hitching post, Maria finally raised her eyes to meet his. Dark circles beneath them spoke of sleepless nights, but there was something else there too, a flash of recognition, perhaps even hope. "The tattoo," she said softly, touching her wrist where the hawk spread its wings in faded blue ink. "You remembered?" Jonas nodded, his scarred face softening slightly. "Hard to forget the healer who saved my life." He glanced around, noting the curious onlookers still watching them. "Best we talk somewhere private." He helped her onto his horse, ignoring the whistles and crude comments from the lingering crowd. The sound of hoofbeats on packed earth followed them as they rode slowly down the street, past weathered storefronts and the telegraph office. Maria sat stiffly in front of him, her hands gripping the saddle horn. "My mother," she said after they'd left the town behind, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was the one who truly saved you. I was just a girl then, learning her ways." "I remember you both," Jonas replied, guiding the horse onto a narrow trail that led toward the foothills. "Your mother's medicines, your songs in the night when the fever had me burning." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Never thought I'd find you here being sold like cattle." Maria's shoulders tensed. "After Mama died, I married a Mexican rancher. Good man, Thomas Lark. He respected the old ways, helped me keep my mother's healing traditions alive." Her voice caught. "But there were those who didn't want us on our land. Thomas died defending our water rights 3 months ago." Jonas felt her tremble and wished he had a blanket to offer against the morning chill. The trail wound higher into scrub-covered hills, and in the distance, snow-capped peaks pierced the sky. "Randall Tate?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Maria nodded. "His men came at night, burned our cabin, said my husband's death meant the land was forfeit." Her hands tightened on the saddle horn. "I had papers, deeds proving our rights to the water and land, but they took everything." Jonas's jaw clenched. He'd seen Tate's kind before, men who built empires on broken treaties and stolen dreams. The cattle baron's reputation for ruthlessness was well known throughout the territory. "That why they put you up for auction? To humiliate you into leaving?" "Sigh." Maria's voice strengthened with anger. "Tate thinks if he can shame me enough, I'll give up my claim and disappear." She turned slightly in the saddle, meeting Jonas's eyes. "But I won't. Those papers exist, and somewhere in Tate's house there's proof of what he did." Jonas studied her face, the quiet determination there, the same spirit he'd seen in her mother years ago. The morning sun caught the silver threading through her dark hair, and for a moment he saw past the fear and exhaustion to the strength beneath. "Then we'll find them," he said simply. Maria's eyes widened. "We? Reckon I owe your family a debt?" Jonas guided the horse around a bend in the trail. "Besides, a man can't stand by while another steals what ain't his to take." Tears welled in Maria's eyes, but she blinked them away. "The town thinks you bought me for other reasons," she said carefully. "They'll talk." "Let 'em." Jonas's voice was gruff but kind. "Been a long time since I cared what folks thought about me." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of leather and the soft clop of hooves on rocky ground. The morning air carried the scent of sage and pine, and a hawk circled overhead, like the one etched forever on Maria's wrist. "I have a cabin," Jonas said finally. "Up in those hills yonder. Not much, but it's safe. We can plan there, figure out how to get your papers back." Maria nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, "for remembering, for helping." Jonas didn't respond, but his presence behind her was steady, solid as the mountains themselves. Together they rode higher into the hills, leaving the cruel laughter of the auction behind, while ahead, the morning sun painted the sky with colors of hope. Evening painted the Colorado sky in deepening shades of purple as Jonas and Maria made their way through the dusty streets. The day's heat lingered in the packed earth, but a chill wind whispered through the buildings, carrying the sounds of revelry from the saloon. "Hey, mountain man!" A drunk miner stumbled from the doorway, pointing a grimy finger. "Bought yourself some company, did you?" His laughter drew others to the boardwalk, their shadows stretching long across the street. Jonas shifted closer to Maria, positioning himself between her and the growing crowd. She kept her eyes down, clutching her bundle of worn skirts tightly against her chest. The fabric trembled in her hands. A handful of stones clattered against the dirt near their feet. "Indian lover!" young voices shouted from the shadows. Jonas glimpsed several boys darting between buildings, scooping up more rocks. "Inside," he growled, steering Maria toward the general store's covered porch as another volley of stones flew past. One struck his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. Women gathering at the milliner's shop turned away as they passed, whispering behind gloved hands. Their sneers cut deeper than the rocks, and Maria's shoulders hunched further. "Almost there," Jonas murmured. His mule waited at the livery stable, already loaded with supplies he'd purchased before the auction. The animal's long ears twitched at their approach, sensing the tension. Jonas helped Maria mount, then swung up behind her. A final stone struck the mule's flank, making it start forward with a grunt. They left the town's hateful stares behind, heading north toward the mountains that rose like dark sentinels against the fading light. The trail wound through scrubby hills and stands of pine. As darkness settled, the only sounds were the mule's steady hoofbeats and Maria's quiet sobs. Jonas felt each tremor that ran through her body, and the weight of what he'd done settled heavy on his shoulders. He'd acted on instinct, seeing that hawk tattoo, but now he had charge of this woman's safety, something he hadn't planned on when he'd ridden into town that morning. After an hour's climb, a small clearing opened before them. Jonas's cabin stood dark against the trees, a simple one-room structure of rough-hewn logs, with a stone chimney rising from the pitched roof. He dismounted first, helping Maria down before leading the mule to its lean-to shelter. "It ain't much," he said, unlocking the cabin door, "but it's dry and warm once we get a fire going." Maria stood in the doorway, while Jonas lit the oil lamp hanging from a ceiling beam. The yellow light revealed a sparse but tidy interior, a plank table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed against one wall, and a stone hearth with cooking implements hanging nearby. Jonas busied himself with the fire, trying to give her space to collect herself. Soon, flames crackled in the hearth, pushing back the mountain chill. He ladled venison stew from a pot he'd left warming that morning and set it before her with a chunk of bread. Maria ate quickly, but neatly, like someone used to better times. "Thank you," she whispered between bites, the first words she'd spoken since leaving town. Jonas settled in the other chair, studying her in the lamplight. The hawk tattoo on her wrist caught his eye again. "That mark," he said carefully. "Your mother's people?" She touched the faded blue lines. "Yes. Among the Apache, it shows which family holds the healing knowledge." Her dark eyes met his. "You remember this?" "I remember fever dreams and herb smoke," Jonas admitted. "After the ambush, didn't think I'd live. But there was a woman who knew the old medicines, and her daughter who sang healing songs through the night." Maria nodded slowly. "Mama was the true healer. I was learning, watching her work with the plants, memorizing the prayers." Her voice softened. "She would be glad to know you survived." Jonas stood and retrieved a wool blanket from his bed. "You take the bed tonight," he said, offering her the blanket. "I'll sleep by the fire. No one knows this cabin exists. You're safe here." Gratitude filled her eyes as she accepted the blanket. "I never thought to find kindness today," she whispered. Soon Maria lay curled on the narrow bed, still holding her bundle of skirts close. As Jonas settled onto his bedroll near the hearth, he noticed how she'd arranged the fabric, something stiff hidden in its folds. But he didn't ask. Trust would come in its own time, like spring thaw to the mountains. The fire popped and settled, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Maria's breathing deepened into sleep, and Jonas kept watch, wondering what tomorrow would bring to his solitary life. Morning sunlight crept through the cabin's single window, painting golden stripes across the rough-hewn floor. Jonas stirred from his bedroll by the cooling hearth, muscles stiff from the hard ground. The familiar scent of wood smoke mingled with something new, fresh cornmeal cooking over the rekindled fire. Maria stood at the hearth, stirring a cast-iron pot with practiced movements. She had already tied back her dark hair with a faded ribbon, and her face showed the peaceful concentration of someone at home with cooking. The sight stirred memories in Jonas of another life, long buried. "Didn't mean to sleep so late," he said, reaching for his boots. "The sun has only just risen," Maria replied softly. "But I thought, perhaps I could make breakfast to thank you." Jonas nodded, pulling on his coat. "Much obliged. I'll get some more wood split before it gets too warm." He lifted his axe from its place by the door, the familiar weight settling into his calloused hands. Outside, frost still silvered the grass in shadowed patches. Jonas set to work, the steady rhythm of chopping matching his heartbeat. The physical labor helped clear his mind, but questions still nagged at him. Why had Tate's men been so eager to sell Maria? What made a half-Apache woman worth auctioning like cattle? The crack of splitting wood echoed off the mountainside. Through the cabin's open door, he could see Maria moving about, setting their simple table. As she bent to retrieve a dropped spoon, her patched skirts caught on a loose floorboard. Something slipped from the fabric's folds, a packet wrapped in oilcloth, tied with twine. Jonas paused mid-swing, watching as Maria hastily snatched up the bundle. Their eyes met across the threshold. Fear flickered across her face, and her hands trembled as she clutched the packet to her chest. Setting his axe aside, Jonas stepped back into the cabin. "Reckon that's what you've been guarding since yesterday," he said quietly, keeping his voice gentle. Maria's shoulders slumped. She looked down at the bundle, then back to Jonas's weathered face. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, because she slowly began untying the twine. "My husband," she said, smoothing the oilcloth flat on the table. "He fought for our people's rights, both Apache and Mexican families who had lived in the valley for generations." Inside the wrapping lay several official-looking documents, the government seals still crisp despite the worn edges of the papers. Jonas moved closer, careful not to crowd her. The morning light caught the elaborate letterhead. Department of the Interior, United States Government. Below were carefully drawn maps and densely written paragraphs filled with legal terms. "These are deeds," he said, realization dawning. "Water rights?" Maria nodded. The agent was honest, rare for his kind. He listened to our claims, saw the proof of how long our people had used the land. Her finger traced a particular line. "This one grants grazing rights to the Eastern Valley, and this—" She turned to another page. "This confirms our claim to Hawk Spring." Jonas drew in a sharp breath. Hawk Spring was the only reliable water source for 50 miles, and the cornerstone of Randall Tate's cattle empire. Without it, his herds couldn't survive the dry season. "Tate knows about these?" "He knows they exist. That is why—" Maria's voice caught. "That is why my husband died. They said it was a riding accident, but he was the best horseman I knew." Her hands clenched on the papers. "I hid these in my skirts, pretended to be simple, slow. I thought if I seemed worthless enough, they would ignore me." "Until they decided to sell you off," Jonas finished grimly, "hoping the papers would go with you into some miner's shack where they'd never be seen again." "Yes." Maria carefully rewrapped the deeds. "Now you understand why I was afraid. These papers, they are life and death. Not just for me, but for all our people who depend on that water." Jonas walked to the hearth, staring into the flames. By pure chance, or perhaps something more, he had stepped into the middle of Tate's private war. A war fought with bullets and accidents, with bought judges and disappeared documents. His peaceful mountain solitude seemed very far away now. Reaching for his axe, Jonas took it to the grinding wheel by the window. The steel sang against the stone as he worked, each turn of the wheel sharpening both blade and purpose. Sunlight caught the edge, bright as justice. Silently, he prayed. Not for escape from this burden, he was past running from hard choices. Instead, he asked for guidance. Was this why he had been led to that auction? Had God placed him here, in this moment, to stand between greed and right? The axe grew keen beneath his hands while Maria quietly served their breakfast. Neither spoke, but the weight of the hidden deeds filled the cabin like smoke, changing everything that would come after. 2 days passed quietly in the mountain cabin. On the third morning, Jonas saddled his mule for the supply run into town. Maria stood in the doorway, wringing her apron. "Stay inside," Jonas told her, checking his rifle. "Bar the door. If anyone comes—" "I will hide in the root cellar," she finished. "Be careful, Jonas." He nodded, touching the brim of his hat. The morning air bit cold as he rode down the winding trail, last night's frost still crackling under the mule's hooves. Pine shadows stretched long across his path, and somewhere a jay scolded his passing. The town looked different now. Every corner held potential threat. Jonas tied his mule outside Miller's general store, keeping his movements casual. Inside, the familiar bell chimed above the door. Dust motes danced in shafts of morning light while he gathered basic supplies: coffee, flour, salt. Behind the seed bins, 2 of Tate's cowhands lounged against feed sacks. Jonas recognized Wade Turner's voice, deliberately loud. "Did you see old Calder at the auction, buying himself that fat squaw?" Cruel laughter followed. Jonas kept his back turned, measuring coffee beans with steady hands. The second voice dropped lower, but in the quiet store, words carried. "Boss is mighty upset about that. Says that Apache woman's got papers could ruin everything he's built. Deeds and such." Jonas's fingers tightened on the scoop. News had spread faster than he had feared. He paid quickly, nodding to Miller's wife, and loaded his supplies. The ride home seemed longer, every rustle in the brush drawing his eye. The sun hung low when he reached the cabin. Maria's relieved face appeared in the window as he unpacked. But before he could warn her about the town gossip, hoofbeats thundered up the trail. 5 riders approached through the deepening shadows. Jonas recognized the lead horse, a gleaming black stallion that cost more than most men earned in a year. Randall Tate himself had come calling. "Inside," Jonas murmured to Maria. "Stay back from the windows." He stepped onto the porch, rifle held loose but ready. Tate reined up in the yard, his men spreading out behind him. The cattle baron sat his horse like a king on a throne, expression pleasant but eyes hard as river rocks. "Evening, Calder," Tate called. "Thought I'd pay a neighborly visit. Invite me in? We can talk fine from here." Jonas didn't move from the doorway. Tate's smile tightened. "Heard you bought yourself some company at auction. Girl named Maria Lark?" He paused, studying Jonas's face. "Thing is, she might have some papers that rightfully belong to me. Business documents, you understand. I'd hate to see a misunderstanding lead to trouble." "No misunderstanding," Jonas said evenly. "Lady's papers are her own." "Papers mean nothing without force to back them," Tate said, dropping all pretense of friendliness. "Law out here comes from the barrel of a gun. You're new to these parts, Calder. I've built everything in this valley. The cattle, the trade routes, the water rights, all mine. I won't let some half-breed scratches on paper change that." Jonas's trigger finger itched, but he kept his voice calm. "Might be time things changed. Think careful on this, mountain man." Tate gathered his reins. "You're choosing a dangerous path. There's still time to be reasonable." His cold smile returned. "I pay well for cooperation. We're done talking." Tate's face hardened. He wheeled his stallion, gesturing to his men. "Remember what I said about guns and law, Calder? Next time won't be so friendly." Jonas watched until the riders disappeared into the gathering dusk. Only then did he lower his rifle and step inside. Maria stood by the hearth, hands clasped tight. "I heard," she whispered. "He will come back. With more men, with fire, with whatever it takes." Her voice broke. "I should leave. Your life was peaceful before—" "No." Jonas set his rifle down and took her trembling hands in his calloused ones. "You're not alone in this fight anymore. We'll meet whatever comes together." Tears spilled down Maria's cheeks, but something else shone in her eyes. A spark of hope, long buried, finally rekindling. They sat at the table, lamp burning low as night settled over the mountains. Maria spread out her precious deeds, explaining each one's significance. Jonas listened, asking careful questions, helping her form a plan. "The circuit judge comes through next month," she said. "If we can get these papers to him—" "We'll need witnesses," Jonas added. "People willing to stand against Tate." They talked late into the night, their shadows dancing on log walls as the fire burned down to coals. Outside, an owl called lonely questions to the stars. But inside the cabin, two souls who had known only solitude found strength in shared purpose. Morning dew still clung to the grass when Jonas found Maria in the kitchen, her shoulders tense from worry. The previous night's confrontation with Tate had left them both on edge. "Come," Jonas said softly. "Let's gather some herbs. Fresh air might do us good." Maria's eyes lit up at the suggestion. They walked together to a sunny meadow where wildflowers nodded in the gentle breeze. Jonas watched as she knelt in the grass, her movements sure and practiced as she examined each plant. "My mother taught me about these," she said, touching a cluster of purple flowers. "This one soothes fever." Her fingers moved to a low-growing plant with tiny white blooms. "And this stops bleeding." Jonas sat nearby, content to listen. The morning sun warmed his shoulders as Maria shared her knowledge, pointing out plants he'd passed 100 times without understanding their worth. "The Apache believe every plant has a spirit," she explained, carefully gathering leaves into her basket. "My mother said healing isn't just about the herbs, it's about respecting their gifts." Her voice carried a quiet dignity that moved Jonas. Despite everything she'd endured, the cruel auction, Tate's threats, years of prejudice, she spoke of her heritage with pride. They found a clear stream for their midday meal. Jonas shared dried venison and cornbread, while Maria added fresh berries she'd discovered. The water chattered over stones, a peaceful counterpoint to their conversation. "I remember a song my mother sang while gathering herbs," Maria said suddenly. Her face softened with memory, and to Jonas's surprise, she began to hum. The melody was gentle, rising and falling like the wind through pine needles. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a bright, clear sound that made Jonas's heart lift. "That's the first time I've heard you laugh," he said quietly. Maria's smile faded to something more thoughtful. "It's been a long time since I had reason to." The afternoon light turned golden as they sat by the stream. Jonas found himself speaking of things he rarely shared. "After my wife died, fever took her. I couldn't bear being around people anymore." He studied his worn boots. "Came to these mountains to be alone. Reckon I've been hiding here too long." Maria listened without judgment, her dark eyes full of understanding. They gathered their things as sunset approached, walking back through the lengthening shadows. Neither noticed the lone rider watching from the distant ridge, one of Tate's men taking careful note of their movements. Inside the cabin, Maria set her basket of herbs on the table. She turned to Jonas, hesitating before touching his arm gently. "Thank you," she said softly, "for choosing me that day, when no one else would." Something stirred in Jonas's heart, a warmth he'd thought long buried, but the feeling frightened him. He wasn't ready for such tenderness. Carefully he stepped back, turning to stoke the fire. "Best get these herbs hung to dry," he said gruffly. Maria withdrew her hand, understanding in her silence. She began arranging herbs in neat bundles, while Jonas moved about the cabin, checking doors and windows, his nightly routine. But tonight felt different. The simple domestic scene tugged at something deep inside him. When Maria had gone to sleep in the small back room, Jonas knelt by his bed. For the first time in years, he prayed aloud, his whispered words barely disturbing the night air. "Lord," he said, "I ain't always understood your purpose. But if you led me to help this woman—" He paused, struggling to find words. "Make me worthy of protecting her. Give me strength to face what's coming." Another pause. "And Lord, help me know what's right. Been alone so long, I ain't sure I remember how to open my heart." The cabin creaked softly in the night wind. Through the window, stars wheeled slowly overhead. Jonas remained kneeling, finding comfort in the silence and the knowledge that, whatever trials lay ahead, he no longer faced them alone. In her room, Maria lay awake, listening to Jonas's quiet prayers. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Not tears of fear or sorrow this time, but of gratitude. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt safe, protected, perhaps even understood. The night settled around them both, keeper and kept, each wrestling with memories of loss and tentative hopes for healing. Outside, the wind whispered through pines, carrying their prayers up into the vast Colorado sky. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the cabin windows, painting golden stripes across the rough-hewn floor. Jonas stood at the door, his expression grave as Maria finished her morning prayers. "We need to move those deeds somewhere safe," he said, adjusting his worn leather vest. "Preacher Matthew Hale has a chapel 2 valleys over. He's known for being fair. Might be our best hope." Maria nodded, gathering her few belongings and the precious documents into a bundle. Outside, the morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. Jonas helped her mount his sturdy mule, while he led on foot, his rifle ready across his shoulder. The mountain trail wound through stands of aspen and pine, their boots and hooves marking the soft earth. Stream crossings slowed their progress, some shallow enough to wade, others requiring careful navigation across slick rocks. Jonas kept a watchful eye on Maria, steadying her when the mule hesitated at deeper sections. "Careful here," he warned, leading them through a particularly muddy stretch. The path narrowed between two large boulders, forcing them to dismount and guide the mule carefully through. By midday, the sun beat down strongly enough to warrant rest. They made camp in a grove of pines, the needle-covered ground soft beneath them. Jonas shared his dwindling supply of venison jerky, while Maria arranged her skirts modestly around her. "Your shoulder's troubling you," she observed, noting how he favored his right arm. "Let me look at it." Jonas hesitated, then nodded. He removed his shirt, revealing an old wound that had healed poorly. Maria's touch was gentle as she examined the knotted scar tissue. She began humming softly, an Apache healing song, while working the stiffness from his muscles with practiced hands. For the first time, Jonas truly looked at her, not as the woman from the auction block, but as she was. Her hands moved with strength and purpose, her face serene in concentration. The cruel words of the townspeople seemed foolish now. He saw only dignity in her movements, kindness in her eyes. "Much obliged," he said quietly, when she finished binding his shoulder with a clean cloth. Maria smiled, ducking her head shyly. They resumed their journey as afternoon shadows lengthened across the trail. The chapel's valley came into view just as evening approached, a peaceful hollow with a simple wooden building at its heart. Smoke rose from several chimneys in the small settlement that had grown around the chapel. Children playing in the dusty street spotted them first. Instead of the usual fearful reactions Maria encountered in town, these little ones ran toward them with curious smiles. Maria reached into her bundle and pulled out corn cakes she had wrapped that morning. "Here," she said softly, breaking the cakes into shares. The children gathered around her, accepting the food with eager thanks. Jonas watched as she spoke gently with each child, her natural warmth drawing them close. "The Lord provides through unexpected angels," a deep voice remarked. Jonas turned to find preacher Matthew Hale standing in the chapel doorway, his white hair catching the last rays of sunlight. Inside the chapel, lanterns cast a warm glow over rough-hewn pews and a simple altar. Maria carefully unfolded the deeds, laying them on the preacher's small desk. Hale adjusted his spectacles, studying each document with careful attention. "These are legitimate," he confirmed after a long examination. "Land grants signed by the territorial agent himself, water rights clearly specified." He looked up at Maria. "Your husband died protecting these?" "Yes," Maria whispered. "The spring feeds the whole valley. Mr. Tate's men—" She stopped, unable to continue. "I understand," Hale said gently. "I'll keep these safe until we can present them to the circuit judge. He's due through in 2 weeks' time." The preacher opened a heavy iron box built into the chapel wall. "No one will find them here." Jonas felt his shoulders relax slightly as Hale locked the deeds away. For the first time since the auction, he allowed himself to hope. Maria's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said simply. "You'll stay the night," Hale insisted, gesturing to the small room behind the chapel. "Both of you. These mountains aren't safe to travel in darkness." Jonas nodded gratefully, feeling the weight of the long day's journey. They had done what they came to do. The deeds were safe, for now. The chapel settlement welcomed them with unexpected warmth over the next few days. Preacher Hale's small kitchen became Maria's domain each morning, where she kneaded bread and stirred thick stews that filled the air with comforting aromas. Children from the congregation drifted in, drawn by the scents and her gentle smile. "Quieren ayudar?" she would ask, teaching them simple Spanish phrases as they helped her shape tortillas or sort beans. Their small hands eagerly mimicked her movements, while she showed them how to pat the corn dough just right. Jonas leaned in the doorway one afternoon, watching as Maria taught 5 young ones to sing a traditional Apache lullaby. Her voice was soft but clear, showing them the hand gestures that went with each verse. The children copied her movements, giggling when they got the words wrong, but Maria's patience never wavered. "Again," she encouraged, "like this." She demonstrated the flowing motion that meant river flowing in the song. Small hands followed, faces earnest with concentration. Through the window, Jonas noticed several settler women pausing their washing to listen. Their initial suspicious glances had softened over the days as they watched Maria with their children. Now they smiled and nodded when passing her on the path, some even asking about her recipes. "Your stew reminds me of my grandmother's," one woman admitted, her weathered face creasing into a smile. "Would you show me how you season it?" Maria's eyes brightened. "Of course," she said. "The secret is toasting the spices first." The days took on a peaceful rhythm. Preacher Hale spent mornings writing his testimony about the deeds, while Maria cooked and Jonas helped repair the chapel's leaking roof. In quiet moments, he found himself watching her more and more, noticing how her face lit up when teaching the children, or how her hands moved with such grace while working. On their third evening, after a hearty supper of beans and fresh bread, Preacher Hale invited everyone to gather in the chapel. Lanterns cast warm light over the wooden pews as folks filtered in, children scampering ahead of parents. "Let us lift our voices together," Hale announced, opening his hymnal. The familiar notes of "Amazing Grace" filled the simple space. Jonas stood near the back, his own voice rough from disuse. But then he heard it. Maria's voice, quiet but pure, joining the chorus. She sang in English, her accent giving the old words new beauty. Something in Jonas's chest tightened. He hadn't felt this way since Sarah died. This warmth, this ache of joy nearly forgotten. Maria's voice rose and fell with the others, but to his ears it shone like a star through clouds. After the singing, people lingered to talk, sharing news and friendly words. Maria sat with several children in her lap, teaching them to clap out a Spanish rhythm game. Their laughter echoed in the chapel's rafters. "She's a gift to this place," Preacher Hale said quietly, joining Jonas. "Those little ones don't see size or background, they just see love." Jonas nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Later they walked back to their borrowed cabin under a sky thick with stars. The evening air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke. Maria wrapped her shawl tighter against the mountain chill. "Thank you, Jonas," she said softly. He glanced at her. "For what?" "For seeing me. Not just—" She gestured to herself. "My size, or where I come from. For seeing who I am inside." Jonas stopped walking. His heart hammered against his ribs as words rose to his lips. Words about beauty and strength and how she made him feel alive again. But fear closed his throat. It was too soon, too fragile. Instead, he reached for her hand in the darkness. Her fingers were warm against his calloused palm. For 3 heartbeats, they stood connected beneath the vast sky. Then, gently, he released her hand, and they walked on. But something had shifted between them, like earth after spring thaw. That brief touch carried the weight of unspoken things, hope, trust, and possibly more. As they reached the cabin, Jonas noticed Maria humming one of the hymns from earlier, her voice carrying peace into the night. Inside, she lit the lamp while Jonas built up the fire. The familiar tasks felt different now, charged with new meaning. They moved around each other with growing ease, no longer strangers thrown together by desperation, but 2 souls finding unexpected harmony. Before retiring to her pallet by the hearth, Maria began teaching him the Apache lullaby from earlier. Jonas stumbled over the strange words, but she smiled encouragingly. Together they practiced until he could manage the first verse, their quiet laughter mingling with the crackling fire. Randall Tate's boots echoed across the wooden floor of Crystal Creek's largest saloon. His face twisted with rage as his spy delivered the news about Maria's presence at the chapel. He slammed his fist on the bar, making glasses rattle. "That woman and her so-called deeds threaten everything we've built," he growled. "Time to remind folks where their loyalties should lie." Within hours, Tate had gathered 24 influential townsmen in the saloon's back room. Smoke from cigars hung thick in the air as he stood before them, his voice dripping with false concern. "Friends, I hate to be the bearer of bad news," he began, pacing slowly, "but that half-breed woman's showing forged papers all over the Chapel settlement, planning to cheat honest settlers out of their water rights." He pulled out a stack of bills, laying them on the table. "We need good men to spread the word about her schemes." Several men reached eagerly for the money. Tate smiled, knowing how quickly whispers could poison a community's trust. That afternoon, Jonas and Maria walked back from the market, their arms full of supplies for the chapel kitchen. The warm day had drawn folks out, but something felt different. Where children had run to greet them yesterday, parents now pulled them away. Shopkeepers who'd been friendly turned their backs. "They're watching us," Maria whispered, noticing hostile glares from a group of men outside the general store. Jonas nodded grimly. "Tate's been busy." He shifted closer to her, shielding her from the worst of the stares. They hurried back toward the chapel, but the weight of those unfriendly eyes followed them. Maria's shoulders slumped with each suspicious whisper that reached their ears. "Forger. Thief. Trying to steal our water." Night fell thick and dark over the chapel valley. The moon cast long shadows through the pines as Tate's riders circled the small building. Their horses' hooves were muffled in the soft earth as they worked quickly, scratching threats into the chapel's wooden door with knife points. When Preacher Hale discovered the vandalism at dawn, his weathered face grew grave. He traced the crude words with trembling fingers: "Leave or burn, and no rights for half-breeds." Inside, he found Jonas and Maria already awake. "Trouble's coming faster than we expected," he said, sinking heavily onto a bench. "Tate's turning the whole town against us with his lies." Maria stood by the window, watching several mothers hurry their children past without stopping for their usual morning lessons. Her eyes filled with tears. "The little ones. I never meant to put them in danger. Perhaps I should go." Jonas crossed the room in 3 strides, taking her shoulders gently. "Number running won't solve this. Those deeds are real, and the truth has to stand." His voice grew softer. "You have as much right to be here as anyone." "Jonas is right," Preacher Hale agreed, "but we'll need to be careful. Tate's men won't stop at threats for long." Through the day, tension grew thick as storm clouds. More hostile faces appeared at the chapel's edge. A rock shattered one of the small windows. Jonas patched it without comment, but his jaw clenched tighter with each passing hour. That evening, as Maria prepared their simple supper, she noticed how Jonas checked and rechecked his rifle. The weapon had been a constant companion since they'd arrived, but now he kept it closer, cleaning it with extra care. "I'm sorry," she said softly, stirring the pot of beans. "I never wanted to bring such darkness to this peaceful place." Jonas paused in his work. "The darkness was already here, Maria, in men's greed and hate. You just had the courage to stand against it." He resumed cleaning the rifle, but added quietly, "And you're not standing alone." When night fell again, Jonas laid the rifle near the door before settling onto his bedroll. Maria watched him from her place by the hearth, noting how his hands lingered on the weapon. The familiar chapel walls felt less safe now, as if Tate's threats had seeped through the wood like poison. Through the window, an owl called out its lonely song. Maria pulled her blanket tighter, remembering other nights of fear, other threats. But something was different now. She looked at Jonas's solid presence near the door and felt strength flowing back into her spirit. Whatever came next, she would face it with dignity, as her mother had taught her. The rifle gleamed dully in the dying firelight, a stark reminder of the violence building around them. But Maria chose to focus instead on the worn Bible on Preacher Hale's desk, the children's drawings still pinned to the walls, and Jonas's quiet breathing in the darkness. These were worth defending, worth fighting for. She closed her eyes, whispering an Apache prayer for protection as the night deepened around the chapel. Outside, unseen riders continued their watch, their horses' bridles chiming softly in the darkness. The first hints of dawn had barely touched the eastern sky when Maria woke to the acrid smell of smoke. Her eyes flew open as shouts erupted outside their small lodging house near the chapel. "Fire! The chapel's burning!" Jonas was already on his feet, pulling on his boots. "Stay close to me," he ordered, grabbing his coat. They rushed outside into the cool morning air, now thick with black smoke billowing from the chapel's roof. Orange flames licked up the wooden walls of the small church. The fire cast dancing shadows across the faces of gathering townspeople. Some stood frozen in shock, while others scrambled to form a bucket line from the nearby creek. "Dear God, no!" Maria whispered, her heart clenching at the sight of the peaceful sanctuary transformed into an inferno. She ran to join the line of people passing buckets, her hands trembling as she worked. Jonas took position closer to the flames, tossing water alongside Preacher Hale. But the fire had too strong a hold. The dry wood of the old chapel caught like tinder, and the morning breeze fanned the flames higher. With a terrible groan, the roof beams gave way. Maria watched in horror as the cross toppled from the steeple, crashing down in a shower of sparks. The sound of breaking glass and splintering wood filled the air as the walls collapsed inward. "It's gone," someone in the crowd whispered. "Everything's gone." Through the smoke and confusion, Randall Tate's voice rose like thunder. "This is what happens when you harbor evil!" He strode forward, pointing an accusing finger at Maria. "That woman brought this curse upon us with her witchcraft and lies." Maria stood frozen as dozens of frightened faces turned toward her. Tate pressed his advantage, playing to the crowd's fears. "First she tries to steal our water with forged papers, now she burns our holy place." His voice dripped with venom. "We all know what Indians do with their dark magic. She's probably cursed us all." Whispers rippled through the gathering. Women clutched their children closer. Men who had worked beside Maria in the bucket line now stepped away, their expressions hardening with suspicion. "That's a lie!" Jonas shouted, pushing through the crowd toward Tate. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes blazing with fury. "You're the only curse here, Tate. You and your greed." Tate's hand moved toward his gun. "Watch your mouth, mountain man. You're outnumbered here." "Truth doesn't need numbers," Jonas growled. Then his fist shot out, catching Tate square in the jaw. The larger man staggered backward as several people screamed. Guns appeared in hands throughout the crowd. Tate's men moved to surround their boss, while others tried to grab Jonas. The scene teetered on the edge of violence until two deputies pushed through, dragging Jonas away from Tate. "That's enough!" the older deputy shouted. "Take him to cool off!" Maria watched helplessly as they hauled Jonas toward the jail, his struggles growing weaker as more men piled on to subdue him. She started to follow, but Tate's voice stopped her. "Not so fast," he whispered, suddenly beside her. His words were for her ears alone. "One word from me, and this mob will tear you apart. Or maybe I'll let them hang your mountain man instead. Either way, you've lost." Maria felt the truth of his words like physical blows. The chapel, her sanctuary, the place where children had sung with her and women had finally begun to accept her, lay in smoking ruins. The townspeople who had started to trust her now looked at her with fear and hatred. And Jonas, the one person who had shown her true kindness, was being dragged to jail for defending her. She stumbled away from Tate, away from the accusing stares and whispered threats. Her feet carried her blindly through the settlement until she found herself kneeling in the ashes of the chapel yard. The ground was still warm beneath her knees. The sun had fully risen now, casting harsh light over the destruction. Bits of paper from hymn books fluttered like wounded birds in the morning breeze. The charred remains of children's drawings crunched beneath her hands. "Creator of all things," she whispered in Apache, her mother's prayers coming back to her. "Great Spirit who watches over the weak." Her voice broke. "What am I to do?" She thought of Jonas, lying bruised in a jail cell because of her, of the children who would now be forbidden to come near her, of Tate's threats, which she knew he would make good on without hesitation. Perhaps it would be better if she simply disappeared, slipped away into the wilderness before she could bring more destruction to those who had tried to help her. The deeds that had caused all this trouble were ash now anyway, burned along with everything else. Maria remained kneeling as the last wisps of smoke rose from the chapel ruins. Her prayers grew more desperate with each passing moment, but no answer came from the silent morning sky. Maria's hands trembled as she dabbed at the cuts on Jonas's face. The jail cell was dim, lit only by a single lantern that cast long shadows across the rough wooden walls. The deputy had let her in after the town quieted, moved by her quiet pleading. Jonas winced as she cleaned a deep gash above his eye. His right hand was swollen, knuckles split from connecting with Tate's jaw. Bruises darkened his ribs where the deputies had struggled to subdue him. "I am so sorry," Maria whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. Each mark on his body felt like her fault. "This violence, this hatred, all because of me." Jonas caught her wrist as she turned to wet the cloth again. Despite his injuries, his grip was gentle but firm. "Look at me, Maria." She kept her eyes down, ashamed of the trouble she had brought him. "Look at me," he repeated softly. Finally, she raised her gaze to meet his. Even through the bruising, his eyes held that same steady warmth she had first seen at the auction block. "Don't you run," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I chose you that day. I'll keep choosing you." Maria's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her with such certainty, such devotion. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "But Tate," she started. "Tate is just a man," Jonas cut in. "A greedy man with guns and money, but still just a man. What you carry is truth. That's stronger than his lies." A cough from the doorway made them both turn. Preacher Hale stood there, his face streaked with soot, clothes still smelling of smoke. The deputy let him through the cell door. "He's right, child," the preacher said, pulling his worn Bible from his coat. "Truth has a way of prevailing, even when evil men try to bury it." He opened the Bible carefully, revealing several folded papers tucked between its pages. "I keep copies of important documents here, including your deeds." Maria stared at the papers in wonder. "You saved them?" Hale nodded. "The originals may have burned, but these copies bear the same signatures, the same seals. They'll stand up in court, if you can get them there." Jonas pushed himself up straighter, ignoring the pain in his ribs. "The county courthouse is south, in Mesa Valley. Marshal Ross holds court there. He's a fair man, known for upholding Indian treaties when they're legal." "It's 40 miles through rough country," Hale warned, "and Tate's men will be watching the trails." "Then we leave before first light," Jonas said. He looked at Maria. "If you're willing to trust me one more time." Maria touched the papers reverently, then tucked them into her skirts. "I have always trusted you, Jonas Calder, from the moment you saw me as a person, not just—" She gestured at her full figure. The preacher placed a hand on each of their shoulders. "I'll speak to the deputy about releasing Jonas early, for medical care. Pack provisions tonight. I'll pray for your safe journey." In the hours before dawn, Maria gathered what they would need: dried meat and cornbread, bandages and healing herbs, blankets against the mountain cold. Her hands moved quickly in the darkness of their lodging house room, guided by years of practice at moving quietly, invisibly, Jonas appeared at her door just as the eastern sky began to lighten, a gray ghost in the pre-dawn gloom. His face was still swollen, but his movements were sure as he helped her load the provisions onto their horses. They had borrowed a second mount from the preacher. Jonas's mule would have been too slow for what lay ahead. "We'll follow the creek south," he whispered, as they led the horses through the sleeping town. "Then cut east through the high passes, harder riding but fewer eyes watching." Maria nodded, her heart pounding as they passed the smoking ruins of the chapel. Part of her still wondered if she should send Jonas away, spare him from whatever violence lay ahead. But she remembered his words. "I chose you. I'll keep choosing you." They mounted up at the edge of town, just as the first pale light touched the mountain peaks. Maria took one last look at the settlement where she had briefly found acceptance, now turned hostile by Tate's lies. Then she turned her horse south, following Jonas into the unknown. The soft thud of hooves on dirt and the creak of saddle leather accompanied them as they rode into the growing dawn. Neither spoke, both knowing that somewhere behind them, Tate's men would soon discover their absence. The next few days would test every bit of Jonas's mountain craft and Maria's courage. But for now, they rode together, two souls bound by trust and justice, carrying truth in their saddlebags and hope in their hearts. The morning star still shone above them, a bright point of light guiding their way south, toward Mesa Valley, and whatever fate awaited them there. The mountain trail wound through stands of pine and aspen, forcing Jonas and Maria to ride single file. 3 days had passed since their dawn escape. Jonas led the way, scanning the ridgelines for movement while their horses picked careful paths over loose shale and exposed roots. Maria watched his back, noting how he favored his right side, where the jail beating had left deep bruises. The morning sun cast long shadows through the trees, and every dark patch made her heart jump, imagining Tate's men waiting in ambush. By midday, thunder growled in the distance. Jonas guided them to a sheltered hollow as fat drops began to fall. They huddled beneath a rocky overhang, sharing strips of dried venison while the storm passed. "Your husband," Jonas said quietly, breaking their watchful silence. "How did he die?" Maria's hand stilled on the leather bag of cornmeal she'd been opening. "Fighting for water rights," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The spring that feeds the valley, it belonged to his people first. Tate's men poisoned the other waterholes, forcing everyone onto his land." She swallowed hard. "Thomas wouldn't back down. One morning they found him by the spring. They said it was an accident." Jonas reached across and covered her trembling hands with his own rough palm. "He died protecting what was right. And now I carry his papers, his cause." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I am not worthy of such a burden. I am just a woman who people mock. How can I honor his sacrifice?" "The Lord chooses the humble to shame the mighty," Jonas said softly. "I've seen you with children, tending the sick, keeping your dignity while others try to strip it away. That's strength, Maria. Real strength." The storm intensified as afternoon faded to evening. They made camp beneath dense pines, the branches providing some shelter from the driving rain. Jonas built a small fire, screening it with rocks to hide the light from any watching eyes. Maria huddled close to the flames, her shawl pulled tight. Jonas settled beside her, offering warmth. After a moment's hesitation, she leaned against him, feeling the solid strength of his shoulder. His arm came around her carefully, protective rather than demanding. "I never thought I'd trust a man again," she admitted softly. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of me was dead too." Jonas was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire dance. "After I lost Sarah, my wife, I fled to the mountains. Thought I'd live alone till I died." His voice roughened. "Then I saw you on that auction block, saw that tattoo, and something woke up inside me. Something I thought was gone forever." Maria turned her face up to his, seeing in the firelight how his expression had softened. Their eyes met, and the space between them seemed to crackle with unspoken feelings. But before either could speak, a twig snapped in the darkness. Jonas was on his feet in an instant, rifle ready. The attack came fast, 3 riders materializing from the shadows. Gunfire split the night. Jonas fired back, but a bullet caught him in the arm. He stumbled, giving the raiders time to snatch their supply bags and vanish into the darkness. "Jonas!" Maria rushed to him as he sagged against a tree. Blood darkened his sleeve. "Just a graze," he grunted, but his face was pale in the dying firelight. Did they take everything? Maria checked their scattered belongings. Most of the food. The medicine bag. She touched her skirts where the deeds were sewn. But not what matters most. She tore strips from her petticoat to bind his wound. The bullet had carved a deep furrow across his bicep. Without her herbs, she could only clean it with water and pray infection wouldn't set in. Dawn found them moving again, though Jonas rode stiffly. They shared the last pieces of cornbread, knowing hunger would be their companion now. Every mile seemed to cost them more effort, their horses struggling on the steep trails. "Like carrying a cross," Maria murmured, as they paused to rest the mounts. Jonas looked at her questioningly. "This journey," she explained, "each step hurts, but we keep going because we must, because truth and justice are worth the pain." Jonas reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. "We carry it together," he said simply. Maria squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from his touch. Ahead lay more miles of rough country, more chances for ambush, more nights of cold and hunger. But in that moment, she felt a certainty settle in her heart. Whatever trials awaited them on the trail to Mesa Valley, they would face them as one. They rode on through the morning light, 2 souls bound by something deeper than circumstance. Though their bodies ached and their supplies were gone, their determination only grew stronger with each mile beneath their horses' hooves. The county courthouse rose before them, a stern brick building dominating the dusty square of Mesa Valley. Jonas and Maria sat astride their weary horses, taking in the scene. Tate's men lounged on the courthouse steps and along the wooden walkways, at least 20 of them, their gun belts prominent and attitudes menacing. "Well, if it ain't the mountain man and his squaw," one called out, spitting tobacco juice in their direction. Cruel laughter rippled through the crowd. Jonas dismounted first, then helped Maria down. Her legs trembled from days in the saddle, but she held her head high. They had come too far to falter now. Jonas kept one hand near his gun as they approached the courthouse steps. Inside, the air was cooler, but thick with tension. The main courtroom's wooden benches were filled with townsfolk and ranch hands, all eyes following them as they made their way forward. United States Marshal Edwin Ross presided from behind a scarred oak desk, his badge catching the light from tall windows. Randall Tate stood at the front, well-dressed and smiling confidently. His lawyer shuffled papers beside him, looking smug. When Maria produced the deeds from her skirts, Tate's smile hardened. "Those papers are forged," he declared loudly. "That woman has no claim to those lands. The spring has been part of my ranch for years." Marshal Ross examined the documents carefully. "These appear to bear proper government seals," he said, "and Preacher Hale's copies match exactly." "Bought and paid for," Tate sneered. "Who would believe a half-breed over a respected rancher?" The crowd murmured agreement, but then the courtroom door creaked open. A hush fell as 6 Apache men entered, led by a tall elder whose silver hair was bound with a medicine man's headband. Maria gasped softly. "Uncle," she whispered. The elder approached the marshal's desk with quiet dignity. "I am running Hawk," he said in clear English. "This woman is my sister's daughter. The mark she bears," he gestured to Maria's wrist, "is sacred to our family of healers, passed down through generations. I have brought these witnesses to speak truth." One by one, the Apache men testified. They spoke of Maria's mother, a respected medicine woman. They described the spring's importance to their people, and how Maria's husband had died defending their rights. Their words carried weight and wisdom that even the hostile crowd couldn't ignore. Tate's face grew darker with each testimony. "This is nonsense," he burst out. "You can't let savages—" "Watch your tongue," Marshal Ross cut in sharply. "These men are recognized tribal leaders under treaty law." He lifted Preacher Hale's Bible, removing the duplicate deeds tucked within its pages. "These copies, witnessed and notarized, match the originals perfectly. The land grants are legal and binding." The marshal stood, his voice filling the courtroom. "By the authority of the United States government, I hereby affirm that the spring and surrounding grazing lands are protected under treaty, with Maria Lark as rightful heir and custodian." Tate exploded in rage. "This is robbery!" He lunged forward, reaching for his gun, but two deputy marshals were faster, restraining him as his weapon clattered to the floor. "Take him out," Ross ordered, "and if any of his men want to object, they can join him in the jail." The fight seemed to drain from Tate as the deputies led him away. His cowhands slunk out of the courtroom, leaving their boss to his fate. Jonas watched them go, then turned to Maria. She stood trembling, tears streaming down her face. Her uncle embraced her gently, murmuring soft words in Apache. When he stepped back, Jonas took her hand in his. Their eyes met, and all the unspoken feelings of their journey flowed between them. "Justice," Maria whispered. "Thomas would be proud." Jonas nodded, his own eyes glistening. "Your courage made it possible," he said quietly. "You never gave up." Marshal Ross approached, handing Maria the deeds, both her originals and Hale's copies. "The law protects these rights now," he said. "No one can take them from you again." The Apache men gathered around Maria, offering prayers of thanksgiving. The hostile crowd dispersed, leaving the courtroom to fill with the warm sound of family reuniting. Running Hawk placed his hands on Maria's shoulders, speaking blessing over her in their native tongue. Jonas stood slightly apart, watching the scene with a full heart. Maria looked up, catching his eye, and reached out her hand. He stepped forward to take it, feeling the rightness of their fingers intertwining. Together they had carried this burden. Together they had found justice. And together, perhaps, they would find even more. In the weeks following the courthouse victory, change swept through the valley like a cleansing spring rain. Randall Tate's once mighty cattle empire withered like sun-scorched grass. His hired guns drifted away, seeking work elsewhere, while his vast herds shrank to a mere handful of cattle on his remaining patch of land. At the spring, something remarkable happened. Settlers and Apache families began sharing the life-giving water, their initial wariness softening into cautious cooperation. Marshal Ross made regular rounds, but his presence was needed less and less as the two communities found their own rhythm of peaceful coexistence. When Jonas and Maria returned to the valley, they found the mood transformed. Where once there had been jeers and thrown stones, now there were tentative smiles and quiet greetings. The children who had once mocked Maria now ran to meet her wagon, begging for stories and the sweet, dried berries she carried in her pockets. One evening, as sunset painted the cabin walls golden, Jonas stood before the shelf where his late wife's Bible rested. With gentle hands, he cleared a space beside it, turning to Maria with eyes full of meaning. "This cabin's been mighty lonely these past years," he said softly. "Reckon it's time to make it a real home again." He reached for her hand, his voice rough with emotion. "Would you do me the honor of being my wife, Maria Lark?" Maria's eyes filled with tears as she placed her hand in his. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling but sure. 1,000 times yes." They agreed to hold their wedding in the chapel, now rising again from its ashes, a symbol of renewal as strong as their love. Like the shared spring bringing new life to the valley, Their union would bridge two worlds and nurture hope for the future. The rebuilt chapel shone like a beacon in the spring evening, its fresh-hewn walls glowing warm with dozens of oil lamps. Through the open doors, the scent of wildflowers and fresh-baked bread drifted on the breeze. Settlers, ranchers, and Apache families filled the wooden pews, their former divisions forgotten in the joy of celebration. Maria stood at the chapel entrance, her heart fluttering beneath the simple white cotton gown she'd sewn herself. Her uncle, the respected healer, stood tall beside her in his finest clothes, tribal symbols carefully painted on his weathered face. He squeezed her hand, and together they began their walk down the aisle. Jonas waited at the altar, his normally stern face transformed by wonder. He'd traded his buckskins for a clean black suit, though his hands still bore the honest calluses of mountain life. When he saw Maria approaching, tears gleamed in his eyes. Tears of gratitude for this unexpected gift of love. Preacher Hale's voice rang clear as he spoke the sacred words. When Jonas and Maria exchanged their vows, their voices carried all the weight of their shared journey. The kiss they shared brought forth cheers and happy tears from everyone present. At the feast afterward, tables groaned with dishes from both cultures, venison stew beside tamales, cornbread next to Apache flatbread. Children's voices lifted in song, their sweet mixture of English, Spanish, and Apache words bringing smiles to every face. They sang the very songs Maria had taught them during those uncertain days, now transformed into celebration. Under the star-filled sky, Jonas drew Maria close. "That day at the auction, when I shouted to stop it," he whispered, "I thought I was rescuing you. But it was you God sent to rescue me." Maria's eyes shimmered as she squeezed his hand, both of them gazing out over the peaceful valley that had become their shared home. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.